I'm Tiffany, and welcome to Towering TBR. If you're new, I suffer from migraines quite a lot, which impacts my vision, and so I use audiobooks as accommodations. This is my second video in my audiobook series. My first, Where to Source Audiobooks, will be linked in the cards and in the description below, so check that out if you've missed it. I love listening to all types of books, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my 12 favorite narrators. Whether you are brand new to audiobooks or whether you're a seasoned reader just looking for more recommendations, I hope this helps you find some excellent audiobooks. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see all of my bookish videos. So my 12 are not ranked. I'm going to talk about them in order of most audiobooks narrated to least audiobooks narrated. I'll be sharing some facts about the narrator and also a sample of their work so that you can see if you like their narration as well. I will be playing these samples at 1x speed, but know that you can always speed up narrators if you find it too slow. I often do that listening on 1.5 or sometimes even up 2x, depending on how fast or slow the narrator is. I have 12 of them, so let's get right into it. The most prolific narrator I love holds the record for most audiobooks narrated, and he has narrated over 1,300 audiobooks. He has been doing it for decades and has amassed several audiobook awards. One thing I think that really helps George Guidall be better than the rest is because he reads all of the books beforehand. He has said in interviews that he never cold narrates a book. He always reads it beforehand to get the meaning and the intention and the tone. He wants to get all of that right. And he needs to know basically what is happening in order to effectively capture those feelings. He has said that many narrators are just reading out loud and that they are missing the emotional underpinning of the text. I first came to adore his narration when I listened to The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. It was a beautiful book, and I think he did an excellent job narrating it. He's narrated a couple of Ursula K. Le Guin's works, as well as many classics as well, like Don Quixote, and several long-running mystery series. I am going to give you a sample of The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin so that you can hear his narration.
Current born, wave flung, tugged hugely by the whole might of ocean. The jellyfish drifts in the tidal abyss. The light shines through it, and the dark enters it. Borne, flung, tugged from anywhere to anywhere, for in the deep sea there is no compass but nearer and farther, higher and lower.
At over 500 audiobooks, one of my favorite narrators is Robin Miles. I first discovered that I loved her when I heard her narrating the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, which starts with the 5th season. She has also won a ton of audiobook awards and is considered the voice of Afrofuturism. She has narrated for N.K. Jemisin, Nnedi Okorafor, and Octavia Butler. She's also very skilled at doing accents. The first book I listened to where she narrated was Under the Udala Trees by Chinela Akparanta, but I didn't realize it was her because she has such a convincing Nigerian accent in that book. And it was only through research that I realized that I had actually listened to her before. She's narrated a wide variety of genres, and I will put up some of the most popular ones up on the screen. And then I will give you the audio sample from the 5th season.
There is a thing she will think over and over in the days to come as she imagines how her son died and tries to make sense of something so innately senseless. She will cover Uche's broken little body with a blanket, except his face, because he's afraid of the dark. And she will sit beside it, numb, and she will pay no attention to the world that is ending outside.
Ray Porter has narrated over 400 books. He is probably most well known for his narration of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and also the Bobiverse series, which starts with We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. Both are excellent sci-fi books, and I just absolutely love his narration. He makes these characters leap off the page. I will say that his voice for Ryland Grace in Project Hail Mary and his voice for Bob in the Bobiverse books are pretty similar, and I would advise that you don't listen to them back to back because that might confuse you. But I think he is an extremely talented narrator, and while he primarily narrates science fiction, he has done some nonfiction as well, which I immediately added to my list since he is such a fabulous narrator. I will give you a sample from Project Hail Mary so you can see if you like his narration.
I wake up. How long was I out? It must have been a while because I feel rested. I open my eyes without any effort. That's progress. I try to move my fingers. They wiggle as instructed. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Hand movement detected, says the computer. Remain still. What? Why? The robot arms come for me. They move fast. Before I know it, they've removed most of the tubes from my body. I didn't feel a thing.
Have you listened to Project Hail Mary? It is incredibly popular, but in my opinion, totally worth the hype. And the audiobook is definitely the way to go for reasons that I can't explain without spoiling something. So if you're going to read Project Hail Mary, definitely get the audiobook. A new favorite of mine is Jeff Hayes. He has narrated around 300 audiobooks. He famously narrates the lit RPG called Dungeon Crawler Carl. And lit RPGs are sort of like watching someone play a video game. The character has to progress down the dungeon. He has to fight monsters and gain levels and look for loot. There is also a very snarky talking cat called Princess Donut, who I absolutely adore. Jeff Hayes just puts so much personality into the characters, and they're just so distinctive. And instead of doing a sample from the book, I'm going to actually show you a sample of him reading on his YouTube channel because I think you'll get to see the differences in the characters even better.
Do I look like an elderly woman with smoke-stained teeth sitting in a bingo hall? Snitch! Nobody likes a snitch. Nobody except the popo. It's not complicated, but it sometimes takes a minute for them to reset. We'll have to go out there. We should do it now before the hunters can get here.
Have you checked out Lit RPG? It is so much fun. It is just plot, plot, plot with some really cool world building. And if you're in a slump, I would recommend you give it a shot because it is just really engaging and so much fun. Next is Juanita McMahon. She has narrated about 250 audiobooks. And I first heard her when I listened to the story Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. If you're new here, Sarah Waters is one of my favorite authors, and I absolutely think the narration is wonderful. While I can't tell all of the different types of British accents she definitely does a variety and really switches things up. She primarily narrates literary and historical fiction. She has done 4 out of 6 Sarah Waters books, and I still have Affinity yet to get to. I will now give you a sample of Fingersmith by Sarah Waters.
My name in those days was Susan Trinder. People called me Sue. I know the year I was born in, but for many years I did not know the date and took my birthday at Christmas. I believe I am an orphan. My mother, I know, is dead. But I never saw her. She was nothing to me. I was Mrs. Suxby's child, if I was anyone's, and for father I had Mr. Ibbs, who kept the locksmith's shop at Lant Street in the Borough, near to the Thames.
At around 150 books narrated is Charlie Thurston. I first heard him narrate The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles. He has an American Southern accent and really helps immerse you in that setting. I then picked up Lark Ascending and Southernmost, written by Silas House, and he narrates both of those, and I adored them. And when I found out he was narrating the book Demon Copperhead, one of my absolute favorites from a couple years ago, I felt like it was a match made in heaven. This wonderful book and this wonderful narrator really came together to bring the story to life. I have plans currently to seek out at least 2 more of the books he's narrated, which were The Cold Millions and American Pain. I will now give you a sample from Demon Copperhead.
First, I got myself born. A decent crowd was on hand to watch, and they've always given me that much. The worst of the job was up to me, my mother being, let's just say, out of it. On any other day, they'd have seen her outside on the deck of her trailer home. Good neighbors taking notice, pestering the tit of trouble as they will. All through the dog-breath air of late summer and fall. Cast an eye up the mountain, and there she'd be.
If you've been on my channel for any length of time, you know that I recently finished the Expanse series written by James S.A. Corey. This is a 9-book epic space opera and has several short stories and novellas in between, and it is narrated by Jefferson Mays. He really brings these characters to life. He has narrated about 90 books, and he doesn't just do sci-fi. He has also narrated other genres as well. He's really great at creating recognizable voices for the characters and made me love Amos and Avasarala even more. And fun fact, he was actually busy at the time they were going to record the 4th book in the series, and so they had someone else do it because he was on Broadway. But when he became available again, they basically had him redo it, and I love that. I'm glad that there is consistency across the board. I don't even think that other version is even available anymore. So I'm going to give you a sample of Leviathan Wakes, which is the first book in The Expanse.
Julie. The scopuli had been taken 8 days ago, and Julie Mao was finally ready to be shot. It had taken all 8 days, trapped in a storage locker, for her to get to that point. For the first 2, she'd remained motionless, sure that the armored men who'd put her there had been serious. For the first hours, the ship she'd been taken aboard wasn't under thrust, so she floated in the locker.
If you haven't noticed a pattern, I really do love accents, and Richard Armitage is one of those men who just has a gorgeous accent. I actually first heard him when he did voice acting on a show called Castlevania. He plays the Belmont character, and I just absolutely fell in love with his voice. When I found out he narrated David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, I was very excited to pick up that specific copy. I do think that added to my enjoyment. I loved it, and I have sought out more books that he has narrated, and I've added a book that he wrote called Geneva, and he also narrates it himself. So I had to add that to my list. He primarily narrates classics and mysteries, and I look forward to listening to more of the books he's narrated. I will now give you a sample from David Copperfield.
Chapter 1. I am born. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anyone else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. It was remarked that the clock began to strike, and I began to cry simultaneously.
At around 56 audiobooks narrated, I want to highlight Gemma Whelan. She is probably most well known as the character Yara from the Game of Thrones. She's a wonderful narrator, and I first heard her when she narrated the wonderful, whimsical, magical fantasy, The Trials of Morgan Crow. She has narrated all of the Morgan Crow books so far, and I really enjoy her narration. There is another very prolific narrator called Julia Whelan, and so don't get them confused. Like, Julia on her own is good as well, but not one of my favorites. She's narrated about 50 books, and both for kids and for adults.
The journalists arrived before the coffin did. They gathered at the gate overnight, and by dawn, they were a crowd. By 9 o'clock, they were a swarm. It was near midday before Corvus Crow made the long walk from his front door to the tall iron rails keeping them at bay. Chancellor Crow, will this affect your plans to run for re-election?
So at 56 books narrated, I'm going to pick something that might be a little bit controversial, but I love Wil Wheaton as a narrator. And I think it's controversial because he doesn't do a variety. He just does his regular voice. And so some people might think, oh, well, he's just not very talented. But I think with the books that he chooses to narrate, they just work. They just really fit. And the first book I listened to was Red Shirts by John Scalzi. He has narrated a ton of John Scalzi's books. I don't know if John Scalzi just basically writes Wil Wheaton as his protagonist, but it just feels like such a perfect fit. And Red Shirts is a satire on Star Trek, a show that Wil Wheaton himself acted on. And so that extra layer of meta details and really added to my enjoyment of the book. He's narrated quite a lot of science fiction books, not only John Scalzi's, but he has also narrated The Martian by Andy Weir and Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I will now give you a sample from Red Shirts.
It was a great story. It was great drama. And it all rested upon him and this moment and this fate, this destiny of Ensign Davis. Ensign Davis thought, screw this, I want to live, and swerved to avoid the landworms. But then he tripped, and one of the landworms ate his face, and he died anyway.
At around 40 books narrated, I am putting Stephen Hogan as another one of my favorites. He has a lovely Irish accent, and I first heard him narrate with The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This really helped establish the setting. His accent transported me to Ireland and really elevated an already wonderful book. I have plans to listen to Skullduggery Pleasant, which is a fantasy series that he narrates. I will now give you a sample from The Heart's Invisible Furies.
Long before we discovered that he had fathered 2 children by 2 different women, one in Drimoleague and one in Clonakilty, Father James Monroe stood on the altar of the Church of Our Lady, Star of the Sea in the parish of Galeen, West Cork, and denounced my mother as a whore. The family was seated together in the second pew, my grandfather on the aisle, using his handkerchief to polish the bronze plaque engraved to the memory of his parents that was nailed to the back of the woodwork before him. He wore his Sunday suit, pressed the night before by my grandmother.
And lastly, I want to name Shohreh Aghdashloo as one of my favorite narrators. She has only narrated 6 books so far. You may recognize her as the actress who played Avasarala on the TV show The Expanse. She has this wonderful, husky, warm Iranian accent, and when she narrated The Blood of Flowers by Anita Amirzvani, it really added a lot to a book I already loved, and I have plans to pick up another that she's narrated called And the Mountain's Echo by Khaled Hosseini. That is my last Hosseini book to read.
Once there was a village woman who longed for a child. She tried everything, praying, taking herbs, consuming raw tortoise eggs, and sprinkling water on newborn kittens. But nothing helped. Finally, she voyaged to a distant cemetery to visit an ancient stone lion, and there she rubbed her belly against its flank. When the lion trembled, the woman returned home, filled with hope that her greatest wish would be fulfilled.
Okay, so those were my 12 favorite narrators. I could go on talking about narrators for way longer, but I think that this is a very good start for you to be able to find some narrators that you enjoy as well. What do you look for in a narrator? Do you love accents as much as I do? After hearing about my favorites, are there any that jumped out that you want to try? Let's have a chat down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy listening.